close your eyes. You're not on a battlefield yet. You're just standing, in fog, in silence. And then, it begins. Not with steel. Not with blood. With sound. Before the first sword was drawn, before the first javelin split the morning air, before any man fell, the enemy tried to kill you with noise alone. This is the story of the most terrifying battlefield in human history, not because of the weapons, not because of the numbers, but because of what you heard. Imagine it. You're a Roman legionary, somewhere deep in the forests of Germania, barely dawn. The fog is so thick you can't see 20 feet ahead. Your sandals are soaked. Your armor is ice against your skin. You haven't slept in days. And then, a low rumble. Not thunder. Thunder fades. This gets louder. This starts coming from everywhere at once. This makes the hair on your neck stand straight up. What you're hearing is the Baritus. The Roman historian Tacitus described it. A harsh, building roar, Germanic warriors humming low behind their shields, using the wood itself to amplify the sound. It would rise and swell until it became something that no longer felt human, something that felt like it came from the earth itself. And Roman soldiers, the most disciplined fighting force the ancient world had ever produced, stood in trained silence and felt fear. But Germania wasn't alone in its psychological arsenal. Because if you want to understand what true sonic terror sounded like 2,000 years ago, you need to understand the Carnix, a Celtic war horn, taller than a man, held vertically, so the sound would carry, reaching over the heads of warriors, over the chaos, into the sky itself. And the bell at the top, shaped like an animal's head, a boar, a serpent, a dragon, mouth wide open. In some versions, the jaw hinged, moving, working, as if it were alive. Imagine standing in Roman formation, watching a wall of Celtic warriors advancing, and above their heads, massive bronze creatures with moving jaws, screaming at you. The Greek historian Polybius stood at the Battle of Telamon in 225 BC and wrote that the sound didn't seem to come only from the instruments. It seemed to come from the hills themselves. Modern reconstructions have been recorded. The sound is haunting. A low drone that builds into high shrieks. Like a dying animal the size of a building. Now multiply that by hundreds. Now add thousands of screaming men behind it. And the battle hasn't even started yet. And then, the charge. The first thing you hear is the pylum. Thousands of javelins. A soft hiss that becomes a roar. And then, thud. Thud. Thud, iron punching through wood, through leather, through flesh, and then men start screaming, not war cries anymore, screaming, because a spear just went through a shield and into someone's arm, because the man beside you just took one in the throat. The Roman gladius, that short, brutal stabbing sword, was designed for one thing: quick thrusts to the abdomen. Gut wounds, almost always fatal. Almost never fast. The historian Livy described Macedonian soldiers seeing gladius wounds for the very first time. Bodies torn open, arms severed at the shoulder, heads completely separated from necks. He wrote that they looked at each other and realized in panic what kind of men they were fighting, the sounds that made those wounds, the wet crunch of steel finding bone, the softer resistance of flesh giving way, the gasps and gurgles of men whose lungs were filling with blood, and over all of it, the constant, unrelenting clash of metal on metal. And then, the animals. War elephants. First brought to Italy by King Pyrrhus in 280 BC. The platforms on their backs. Riders crashing drums and spears together. The elephants themselves. Screaming sounds that Roman horses had never heard. The panic was immediate. The cavalry, supposed to be Rome's striking power, dissolved into chaos. Thousands of horses at full gallop, the ground shaking. Horses screaming from wounds, a sound ancient sources say that haunts anyone who survives it. The Romans eventually discovered that squealing pigs would panic war elephants. Let that sit with you. The battlefield was already so loud, so saturated with horror. That adding screaming pigs was considered a legitimate tactical advantage. And through all of it, you couldn't see past the man in front of you. You couldn't hear past the immediate roar. You didn't know if you were winning. You didn't know if your friends were alive. You knew nothing, except what your body screamed at you. The smell of blood and opened bowels, the heat of bodies crushed together. The noise so complete, so total, that thinking became almost impossible. And still, you had to keep your shield up, still thrust with your gladius, still listen, through all of it, for the Roman signal trumpets. The tuba, the cornu. Because if you missed that order in the chaos, you died. Rome's soldiers served 20 years. 20 years of this nightmare. Campaign after campaign, battle after battle. The ones who survived weren't simply tough. They were fundamentally changed, because the sounds followed them home, in the quiet moments, in the dark, in their sleep. The Berytus building in the fog, the Carnics screaming above a charging army, the gurgles of dying men who fought beside them. 2,000 years before anyone had a name for it. Roman veterans carried their wars home inside them. We can read about these battles today. We can stand in museums and stare at reconstructed weapons. We can even listen. Recordings exist of recreated Carnics horns, played by modern musicians, echoing through modern concert halls, and it still raises the hair on your arms. Imagine what it did to a man already soaked in blood. The Roman soldier wasn't fighting for glory. Not really. He was fighting to survive the next 10 seconds. And every sound on that battlefield, every roar, every shriek, every dying gasp was a reminder of exactly how close death really was. Before tanks, there were war horns. Before bombs, there were screams that shook the earth. Before psychological warfare had a name, it had a sound. And somewhere, in the fog of a Germanic forest 2,000 years ago, a Roman soldier stood perfectly still, listening to that sound grow, and chose to hold the line anyway. That is what courage looked like. Not the absence of fear, the decision to stand, even when everything you could hear was telling you to run. If this moved you, if these forgotten men left something in your chest, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. Because the Roman soldier's story is far from over. And, as always, may history never be forgotten.